It shouldn't be surprising that a film like The Lion King had a lot of secrets off-screen that they couldn't show us. I mean, the movie was only an hour and 28 minutes long after all, and that's including the credits, but I never expected them to actually have fully fleshed out characters that didn't make it into the finished movie. For example, did you know that Nala may have had a secret brother? Get ready because we're about to dive into the tragic story of Mehitu and how he may have been Nala's brother that fans never got to meet. Mehitu was a character that was developed to be in The Lion King who would act as Nala's younger brother that she would have had to watch out for and protect. Unfortunately, though, he never actually made it into the film. According to Linda Wolverton, she began designing Mehitu as a character that Nala would need to protect from Scar once he got rid of Mufasa and became the king of Pride Rock. However, he was eventually dropped from the story altogether. This was because factoring in not only Mufasa's death, but also the utter desolation of the once beautiful, lush Pride lands thanks to Scar and the hyenas, the movie was already getting very dark and heavy. The idea of having a young cub thrown into this very dramatic story for the sole purpose of getting bullied or hurt by the villain was seen as too much, so he was ultimately cut from the storyline. That said, based on the design of the character and the concept art for him, some fans have theorized that Mehitu was actually meant to be Scar's son. According to the concept art for Mehitu, he was set to have a very pale tone of fur, which would contrast with Nala's fur color, much like Scar and Mufasa seem to contrast each other. On top of that, it looked like Mehitu was going to have a very thin and sharp-looking nose, which once again resembled Scar's features rather than the other lions in the Pride. This would imply that Scar and Serafina started a relationship after he became the king. Interestingly enough, this is actually a theory that already exists and that we've covered on this channel before. Some fans believe that Scar and Serafina were tied to one another, much like Mufasa and Sarabi, with some even suggesting that the pair were betrothed to each other when they were younger, only it just didn't become an active relationship until Scar officially took over Pride Rock. As I mentioned before though, Mehitu was ultimately scrapped and never made it into the film or any of the spin-off shows or books. Still, I firmly believe that Mehitu would have made an interesting character who could have helped change or add more depth to the plot of the original movie. Now, say a character like Mehitu was put into the film for Nala to protect and to add some depth to Scar's story specifically. Even simple questions for Mehitu could have had an interesting outcome, such as, what do you think would have happened to him by the end of The Lion King? Sadly, almost every theory that fans have come up with about Mehitu ends poorly for the young cub, with some even thinking that his own father would have killed him. Now, it's important to note that for this theory, Scar considered himself the father of Mehitu. By this point in the story, Scar was already the king of Pride Rock, which may have led to a relationship between and Serafina, as stated before, that resulted in the pair having a child together. Or so Scar thought. You see, according to this version of Mehitu's theorized story, Serafina wasn't entirely honest with Scar. Whether it was out of fear of what he would do to her or simply because Scar didn't make her happy, Serafina may have been seeing another male lion behind the villainous king's back. Now, you might be wondering what other males were in the Pride at this point, especially while Scar was in charge, and to that I say, it may not have been a lion from the Pride lands. I know it might sound shocking, but there are actually multiple theories about a strange male lion that Serafina may or may not have had a relationship with. That particular theory is based on the story Nala's Dare, which was a part of the 6-part book series The Lion King 6 New Adventures. In that book, which is technically not considered canon, Nala was dared by other cubs in the Pride to interact with a rogue lion that had been spotted in the Pride lands. Nala went through with the dare, of course, and sought out the lion who ended up saving her from a group of hyenas that was tracking the young cub. The rogue lion was named Nee, and after Serafina discovered that he saved Nala, she was more than welcoming to him. While Nala got in trouble for roaming around on her own, Nee was invited to spend time with the Pride because he had officially earned their trust. However, some fans think that Serafina may have built a stronger bond with Nee than the book described. Well, according to this theory, Serafina had been meeting with Nee in secret even after Scar took over the Pride lands. After one of those secret rendezvous, though, Serafina realized that she was pregnant and therefore she was forced to pretend that it was Scar's child. The theory suggests that this worked at least for a little while, and Scar began to raise Mehitu as his heir. However, somewhere along the way, the villainous lion would have discovered the shocking truth, and in his rage, it's theorized that he then plotted to kill the child that he once believed was his own. Thankfully for Mehitu and Serafina, the theory claims that Scar's plan failed, and Mehitu ultimately survived, though he was forced to run away from the Pride lands and live the rest of his life as a rogue. Now, this theory is really cool because it opens up the possibility that Mehitu is still alive somewhere elsewhere and could even return to the Pride Lands one day after learning about Scar's eventual demise. Who knows, maybe he even met up with Nee and had a proper family reunion. Sadly though, that may be one of the happiest endings for Mehitu compared to the rest of the theories in this video. But what could be worse than having the king who used to raise him as his own son wanting him dead? Well, there's actually a theory out there that suggests that Scar didn't want Mehitu at all, which is so messed up. As you know from The Lion King, after Scar took over Pride Rock, the Pride Lands suffered greatly. They went from being lush green fields filled with diverse wildlife to a massive, dark, and barren wasteland that was completely devoid of life. This means that food would have been extremely scarce and it was continually becoming even harder to come by, which is the worst case scenario for a pride of lions, especially for all the cubs. While an adult lion can deal with certain plights like temporary starvation or drought to an extent, the same can't be said for the cubs. Malnourishment is much harder for their young bodies to fight through, and tragically, that might have been the exact condition the Mehitu and other cubs at the time would have been facing. Now, don't get it twisted. The theory does suggest that Scar was originally very happy to finally have an heir of his own. In fact, he likely would have started out by raising Mehitu to become a strong and powerful king. However, you can't fight nature, so due to the lack of food in the Pride Lands, Mehitu ultimately grew up weak and sickly. Mehitu's malnourished state wouldn't have made Scar happy, and the more and more that Mehitu started to resemble lions like Nuka, the less connected Scar would have felt to the cub. As the theory continues, it's believed that Scar decided that Mehitu wasn't worth the trouble anymore and cast the cub aside before setting his sights on a new heir, which The Lion King 2 tells us was Kovu. Now, it's unclear whether or not Mehitu ended up surviving or dying based on this theory, but either way, there wasn't much of a happy life ahead of him. If this theory is accurate, then it's likely that Mehitu would have ended up either dead or an outcast with the other followers of Scar when Simba returned. This is definitely one of the saddest theories about Mehitu. However, what if I told you that the young cub wasn't targeted because he was weak, but instead because of who his father was? This last theory that I have for you surrounding the strange absence of Mehitu from The Lion King suggests that, once again, Scar may have been unknowingly raising a cub that wasn't actually his. Only in this case, Mehitu's lineage would have been much closer to the pride than Scar was comfortable with. You see, according to the theory, after Scar became king of the Pride Lands, he and Serafina started their relationship together and shortly after gave birth to a cub that they named Mehitu. However, what Serafina didn't want Scar to know was that she may have been pregnant before he took over as the king. It suggested that before Scar lost the Roar of the Elders and caused the Lion Guard to disband, there was a member of the guard who had grown rather close to Serafina. Serafina found herself pregnant with a second cub, but before she could reveal this to the true father, Scar turned the Roar of the Elders back on his teammates. The theory continues by explaining that Mehitu's real father passed away after the Lion Guard fell apart, and in order to save herself and the life of her unborn cub, Serafina let herself become close to Scar. However, this protection only lasted until the shocking truth came out. Much like the first theory in this video, once Scar suspected that Mehitu wasn't actually his son, he likely would have had Mehitu killed by the hyenas. If Mehitu was lucky, he somehow got away and became a rogue lion outside of the pride, but even that's not really a happy life for the poor cub. No matter what fate is given to Mehitu, it's hard to deny the fact that adding him into the world of the Lion King could have had a massive impact on Scar and the way he ruled over the Pride Lands. What do you think though? Which of these Mehitu theories do you think would best describe his outcome if he was kept in the story of the Lion King? Be sure to let me know in the comments below.